One myth found in history books is that the United States was surprised by Chinese intervention in the Korean War. This was no surprise because China warned that it would intervene if American forces moved north of the 38th parallel. War with China was sought by General Douglas MacArthur, who wanted an excuse to overthrow its new communist government. He assumed that American air power could demolish Chinese armies, while Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist forces landed from Taiwan and marched to Beijing. However, the Chinese army proved far better than expected in Korea and stymied MacArthur's secret plan. American President Harry Truman ended this plot by firing General MacArthur. During World War II, American President Franklin Roosevelt assumed that China, under Chiang Kai-shek's leadership, would become a great Allied power. After the war, a Chinese civil war resumed, and by 1949, the Communists had defeated the American-backed Nationalists led by Chiang. See the short video link below for details. Who lost China became a big political topic in the United States, and President Harry Truman was criticized by those who had demanded direct American military intervention. Corporate America lost billions of dollars invested in China, while American military dominance in Asia was now challenged. Most of Chiang's forces had escaped to Taiwan in 1949, with help from the U.S. Navy, and were rebuilding with plans to invade China. Substantial nationalist forces continued fighting near Burma, western China, and offshore islands. The American CIA supplied these forces that battled the Chinese army, while some American politicians argued for direct American military support of an invasion by Chiang's army. This was opposed by those who worried the United States would become mired in an endless war in China, just like the Japanese army a few years earlier. Communist movements threatened Greece, Turkey, and Italy, while NATO had just been created and West Germany had no army. They wanted American resources focused on defending Europe. American President Truman agreed, which is why he had rejected direct American military intervention in the Chinese Civil War. General Douglas MacArthur was commander of American forces in Asia and quietly supported a war with China, along with Senators Joe McCarthy and Pat McCarran. Chiang's government in Taiwan funded a China lobby in Washington, D.C. to promote this effort. General MacArthur was a popular figure with strong opinions who President Truman mistrusted. Truman was surprised to learn that the U.S. Navy had landed several thousand nationalist troops on mainland China, supported by air units, on March 18, 1950. They captured the town of Sungmin that laid about 200 miles south of Shanghai. The Nationalists reported that they killed over 2,500 communist troops. Battles continued for weeks, but the Nationalist forces were unable to attract support from local civilians. As tensions rose, on June 27, 1950, President Truman ordered General MacArthur to deploy the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet to prevent attacks on Taiwan by the Chinese Communists, and conversely, further attacks by Chiang's army on the Chinese mainland. MacArthur flew to Taiwan on July 31st and conferred with Chiang and his generals. Press reports speculating that MacArthur had made secret agreements with Chiang caused Truman considerable unease. Domestic unrest in South Korea worsened after the United States retained it as a colony in 1945. The Americans kept the same colonial government officials, police, army officers, and business executives who had served Japan. North Korea had purged all Japanese collaborators and demanded a unified and independent Korea free of foreign influence. Fighting occurred with South Korean forces along the border in 1949. After the South Korean army attacked across the border in June 1950 and captured a city, North Koreans attacked south and captured Seoul, and the South Korean army collapsed. The United States intervened and smashed North Korea's army. See the short video link below. American forces quickly reoccupied all of South Korea, crossed the 38th parallel, and invaded the north. This violated an agreement with the Soviets that had split Korea. The Chinese and Soviets viewed the Americans as foreign invaders. China sent a message via Indian diplomats that it would not allow American forces to occupy North Korea, and its foreign minister publicly warned that it would not tolerate an invasion of its neighbor. The Prime Minister of India suggested that Communist China be admitted to the UN Security Council and that the United States, Soviet Union, and China explore means to end the Korean War. Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin promptly accepted, but the United States rejected the offer. The American army in North Korea advanced quickly towards the Chinese border. The White House was concerned about Chinese intervention and ordered General MacArthur not to bomb areas near the Chinese border and to only allow South Korean soldiers to advance near the Chinese border. MacArthur allowed bombing anyway, claiming that it was tactically necessary. Many thousands of Chinese soldiers quietly crossed the Yalu River into North Korea at night. American intelligence and aerial reconnaissance detected these movements, but the Americans continued north. On October 25, 1950, Chinese infantry divisions attacked and destroyed a South Korean division, and after 4 days of fighting, caused another division to retreat. The U.S. Army's famous 1st Cavalry Division, with lots of tanks, was sent to the rescue. After 3 days of heavy fighting that became known as the Battle of Unsan, it retreated with heavy losses. This stunned American generals who assumed that air superiority and heavy tanks would smash the Chinese attack. General MacArthur now knew the Chinese had entered North Korea in force. His army was exhausted, with limited supplies after its rapid advancement, and a harsh Korean winter had begun. This was a good time to establish a defensive line and allow diplomats to mediate a Korea solution with the Soviets and Chinese. However, MacArthur had expected Chinese intervention and planned to destroy the Chinese army. American units continued forward to the Chinese border. The Chinese sent foot infantry marching through hilly terrain to constantly outflank the road-bound Americans. This led to a general retreat by the stunned Americans, as General MacArthur demanded more troops and permission to bomb targets in China. As the Chinese offensive continued, leaders in Washington worried the entire American force could be overrun. They dispatched dozens of atomic bombs to Japan in case of emergency. General MacArthur was embarrassed by the defeat of his forces. He publicly spoke in his own defense that the political limitations on his operations were an enormous handicap. He proposed to Army Chief of Staff, General J. Lawton Collins, then visiting the Far East, that the United States begin bombing inside China and blockading its ports. On February 13, 1951, in a statement to the press, MacArthur said that his, quote, tolerant effort to contain the war to the area of Korea, through expansion of our military operations to its coastal areas and interior bases, would doom Red China to the risk of imminent military collapse. Many viewed this as a threat to use nuclear weapons and invade China. MacArthur's army struggled with Chinese forces in Korea, yet he wanted to expand the fighting to all of China. President Truman viewed this as insubordination and worried that MacArthur might somehow override orders from the White House to drop atomic bombs. MacArthur often stated that he was commander of United Nations forces in Korea and was enforcing its resolutions, and some feared he might disregard orders from the White House. This concern, along with his military failure in Korea, led to his dismissal in April of 1951, and the plot for war with China ended.
I have therefore considered it essential to relieve General MacArthur so that there would be no doubt or confusion as to the real purpose and aim of our policy. It was with the deepest personal regret that I found myself compelled to take this action. General MacArthur is one of our greatest military commanders, but the cause of world peace is much more important than any individual.